Last but not least, we are going to listen to Dr. Juan Gabriel Ruiz. He is professor at the Translational Medicine Department, Herbert Wetham College of Medicine, Florida International University. He is a medical doctor and pediatrician from Javeriana University and San Ignacio Hospital, Bogotá, Colombia. He is founding member and senior lab research of Fundación Kangaroo. One of his main valuable areas of interest is the development and implementation of evidence-based healthcare guidelines. When you decide.
Thank you very much. Is this working? Yep. Thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos. Muchas gracias por estar acá con nosotros. Me siento muy honrado de poder compartir la audiencia con ustedes y con estos excelentes investigadores que han presentado maravillosos resultados de investigación. Thank you very much. Okay. First, I would like to say that I do have a conflict of interest to declare. As you heard, I was strongly biased towards kangaroo mother care since the inception of the first research, practical research and empirical research in Colombia in the 80s in company with Natalie Charpak. Therefore, I have to confess that I'm strongly biased in favor of kangaroo mother care. But I have also to try to abide to science, and this is what I'm going to try to do in the following 20 minutes, I guess. Let's see how it goes. Okay, there is a growing body of literature about KMC, and there has been a cluster in the last 15 years, and particularly good randomized controlled trials that were not the largest body, are now prevalent. That is good news. And as you can see, in the last few years, there's been a lot of focus on looking into the safety and the efficacy. I wouldn't say yet the effectiveness, and I won't go into the nuances between efficacy and effectiveness. We don't have time, and I don't want to patronize you, sorry. But yes, it's efficacy what we are looking at more than effectiveness at this moment of immediate KMC in research-restricted healthcare facilities, and this is in the process of assessment. So when I talked to the organizers a long time ago, the initial purpose of this systematic review was to critically appraise and summarize the evidence coming from truly randomized controlled trials, clinical trials, that had been completed and published. But 1 week ago, I have my luggage almost ready. Ta-da-da-da. News. World Health Organization is announcing a very bold, strong recommendations. There is a new recommendation that says immediate KMC should be implemented for all low birth weight and preterm infants in all settings, home facilities, in basically on all countries, of course, with clear indications when it is appropriate. I said, wow, 2 things. First, we've been growing tired of these huge delays between having the evidence and implementing the evidence. I don't know if you remember the time lag between oral rehydration therapy and then this becoming a life-saving intervention. It was something like 50 years. And here we had evidence being clustered since 2015 and now put into a recommendation at a global level. That is great. So I'm going to come to Madrid for vacation. My job has been done. Great. Then I start looking into the materials and something caught my attention. I have done almost exactly the same exercise. I have bumped into the 3 key papers that were quoted here. And yep, the same amount of subjects, great. But I have a discrepancy with the grading of the certainty provided by the current evidence. It didn't match, so I went back to the drawing table and really completely the focus of my presentation. So I didn't escape. I had to really present. No problem with that. And the objective of this revised presentation in the last week would be then to identify completed publishes randomized controlled trials, protocols of randomized controlled trials that might be planned for the future or ongoing, systematic reviews of randomized controlled trials that are comparing immediate versus usual KMC provision, reporting the probability, the risk, the frequency of neonatal mortality, so the first month of life, critically appraise them and summarize evidence and bring into the job some additional things in exploring relevant issues regarding the external validity and applicability of the evidence. There is something that is becoming more and more prevalent in the logic of summaries of evidence that probably is a problem that is not widely understood and expressed, and is based on what is called the relative risk effect model. And I will leave it as that, otherwise I will exceed my time. But I did some work regarding that logical model. Okay. So the methods, I'm going to just brush them because they are the classical methods of systematic review. So these were the data sets that were revised. I included registries of clinical trials. And this is just to show you the flavor of how were the different research strategies, the search strategies. This is the PubMed basic strategy, but it was, let's say, transported to every single database appropriately. And these were the basic methods. The idea was list of names and abstracts of papers going one by one and identifying potentially relevant. And then when they were relevant, download the complete report, and then go into the methods and find out if it is a randomized controlled trial, if really is the population of interest, and if it is really the intervention of interest. And that they were reporting the focus of this part of the review, neonatal mortality. And also saying something similar regarding systematic reviews. And for the appraisal, I used the already familiar Cochrane grade guidelines. It's a little enhanced by using the logic of a effect model. Okay. Beautiful picture taken from Quality of Care Network. And basically, 323 titles that seem worth looking, then fulfilling initial inclusion criteria out of 239 randomized controlled trials, 10, and among them, 3 really addressing the question that we were interested. Systematic reviews, as you can see, a lot, 84, but only 7 seemed appropriate, and only 1 was really addressing exactly. And it was the systematic review that was commissioned by the group that developed the recommendations for WHO. And in protocols, lots of protocols, but 3 that corresponded to the already published 3 studies, and 1 from an ongoing study that hasn't been reported yet in Africa also. Okay, brief going through the evidence-based tables grade style. So you get the basic information from each one of the trials. So this is Gambia. We're talking about 260-something subjects, and it was really a randomized controlled trial. The grading of the strength of the evidence to support the recommendations. I don't know if the pointer works, it doesn't work, but let me navigate you a little bit towards that. Random sequence, yes, no problem with that. Allocation concealment, yes, no problem, no bias from that. Blinding of participants, impossible. This is a burden that Kangaroo Mother Care has carried out. And if you are careful to measure the outcome independent from that, that is not a problem. But regardless of the effort that you can put, just the knowledge of providers and patients about what is the intervention unconsciously turns to bias. So, for instance, we said, no way of making it double-blind, problem. Sorry, we have to assign high risk for bias there. All the other things were no problem except for the dimension of other sources of bias. And this was common to all African countries. During the preparation of the protocol, the mortality in the setting was 48% in that population, the neonatal mortality. And just by getting ready to start the study, the influence of the intervention reduced that by more than a half. That is called the halo effect or the Hawthorne effect. And we pray that this is not a transient effect that fades away in time, but we know that it will fade. So most of the observations made here might not really translate in the long term into what is the real operation. So this is a source of potential bias that affected the African sites participating in all these studies. I don't know to what extent the Indian site would be experiencing the same halo effect. I didn't have specific information on pre and during trial change in mortality. Okay, it's not working. Okay, now, this is what you already saw. It was presented in full detail, so I don't need to go into the details. It's a very strong, well-conducted, well-conceived randomized control trial. But again, open label, they did a lot of effort to try to maintain the same performance. Nevertheless, there is uncertainty, risk there, so we need to grade it, high risk for that. And because of ethically and moral correct reasons, it was stopped early. So it's the correct way to be done. The problem is that you pay a price when you do that. There is strong evidence showing that when you have to stop a trial for benefit, it tends to sometimes very strongly bias the results towards a difference. So you need to keep that in mind. And of course, there was another thing that I will work on that a little bit more, but I need to run, is heterogeneity. I'll show you. Then the other study was this in Madagascar, and also the same profile. And there is another study that is a phantom, because it hasn't been published yet, from Uganda, that attempt to collect around 2,000 infants. And of course, I don't know all the biases because it has not been published, but there is also potential for Hawthorne effect. Okay, so this was my discrepancy with the table from WHO. My assessment of risk of bias was not low, it was serious. Serious is not awful, the scale is ordinal. It's low, serious, and very serious that is really a concern, but was not low. And the same happened with inconsistency. No, you're saying, no, the three studies were kind of aligned. No, the African sites were aligned one way, and the India participant in the randomized control trial was the other, and there was clear heterogeneity in the results. And then a phantom publication bias, because it's not really publication bias, it hasn't been published. But new information coming from the Uganda might tip the balance, we don't know. It would be great to have that information. So the certainty is not high, in my opinion. It's a judgment. I can be wrong. It's a matter of debate. But in my opinion, the certainty of the evidence is between low and moderate. So briefly, the typical forest plot, as you can see, the three studies, the average effect is protective. 0 here is 1 because this is logarithmic. And then when you try to use the different sites as if they were independent studies using the same protocol, exactly the same forest plot meta-analysis. When you do a subgroup analysis, you can see that the main driver is the results from the participant site in India, and all the other African put together, they are not statistically significantly different, suggesting that the effect might be differential according to setting, which is troublesome. So are we in the face of a new bright day era, or there's some uncertainty still there? Let's just summarize briefly, because my time is almost over. Okay, among the 3 randomized controlled trials reporting neonatal mortality, the main driver of the effect was the WHO study, and it was natural, it was the largest. Early termination, which I insist, was the correct thing to be done, pays a price that can strongly, we don't know, but there's potential for a strong bias towards benefit. And among the participant centers in the WHO study, the driver was the India participant center. So the baseline conditions in this population mix are likely to strongly differ between India, let's say, portraying a middle-income country, and most African countries representing more restricted settings. And if that is correct, when we pull the data from all strata, the only significant association really is driven by the India contribution. So if estimations are made only, again, I stress that, using the African participants, fixed non-random effects show a significant difference. So evidence is not sufficient to make a recommendation. Recommendation is a complex construct, and there are many, many things that needs to be taken into account. It's not sufficient, but it's necessary. You need to have a lot of certainty on the data that you have. And let me restate, these are good quality studies. It's hard to figure out how to make them better, but there are limitations, and we need to live with the limitations. So, next questions. Is this cost-effective? Will be the best way of allocating scarce resources to start impacting? What else needs to be done in parallel? So there are several considerations, like technical efficiency that is shown here, probably productive efficient, but allocative efficient is a much more complicated issue that needs a lot of more judgment and data. Closing remark, beware of the Hawthorne effect. Drastic decrease on baseline mortality that was almost half in all participants' institutions just by the fact of going there and modifying the hospital's environment, the ecosystem, is responsible for the largest drop in mortality in the experience. It's not experimental. It's an observation. It's a before and after, but it's huge. So, allocative efficiency says, where shall I put my finger first or in parallel? That is just the last message that I wanted to convey. Thank you very much for your attention.